I'm going to do something completely uncharacteristic of what I would normally do in an episode like this. Okay, me taking probably the most complicated thing I could possibly imagine in all of existence, right? Something that I would just love to make a 3.5+ hour long episode about, which, and I did, by the way. This is now like my probably 5th or 6th recording of this. But ultimately, I've seen the statistics of how many people watch or listen to my episodes all the way through completion, and I decided this is such an important concept that I'm actually going to make this a short one. I am going to provide as little of backstory and subtext as possible and just launch straight into an explanation on this one. So bear with me if you're not used to me going, lightning round on you like this. We're just going to jump right into probably the deepest question ever posited by humankind ever. Okay, here we go. Okay, so today I'm going to try to answer the most controversial question of all time. Okay, if God exists, why does evil exist? Or to expand upon that a little bit more, if God exists and is all-powerful and all-loving, why does evil exist? Why do bad things happen? And most importantly, why do bad things happen to good people? And for any of you atheists or agnostics out there, okay, I used to be both. In order to follow my line of reasoning, you're going to have to pretend at least that God exists. Okay, we are also going to have to assume that God is all-powerful and all-loving. Okay, so bear with me. So first of all, nothing is perfect. Absolutely nothing in this universe is. Seriously, go look that up on ChatGPT or something. Do all the research you want. If we're treating perfection as symmetry, okay, as we should, there is nothing absolutely perfectly symmetrical in the universe, and for good reason. Perfect symmetry essentially cancels itself out in this universe, which means we wouldn't have a universe at all if absolute perfect symmetry were possible. Nothing could exist. I'm talking atoms, forces, energy, none of this. But even if it could, chemical reactions wouldn't be possible under such conditions, okay? But even if they were possible, please explain to me how a perfectly symmetrical circulatory system would function. Okay, describe a perfectly symmetrical heartbeat. The only way for existence to exist at all is for it to nucleate or precipitate around imperfection, around asymmetry. That fact, though, is not the important part. The important part is how this system came to be in the first place. Okay, now, I could get into the Big Bang. Okay, I could go even further back into cosmic inflation or even the initial quantum fluctuation that resulted in all of this. But all of that would only explain the aftermath of the introduction of asymmetry and imperfection. Current science, okay, can only take us so far here. And so what we're going to do here is we are going to take one of the more popular creation stories and try and suss out any conceivable plausibility, metaphoric or otherwise. Yes, I said creation. I am arguing for God here, so as much as it pains me, okay, being a man of science, I am going to take the story of Genesis. Yes, that one, the little silly little fairy tale in the Bible. I'm going to take that and squeeze any amount of truth at all that I can out of it, be it metaphoric or otherwise. Is it possible that everything in existence, okay, the stars, the planets, the Milky Way, all galaxies, the galactic filaments, the cosmic microwave background radiation, all of this stuff, you, me, your mom, okay, everything, could this all be the result of an all-powerful and all-loving God speaking things into existence? You know, the whole let there be light and then there was light thing? Is that even remotely plausible, metaphoric or otherwise? Well, I would say that it is extremely plausible as long as we're not being literal here. Being literal with this is where the modern mind fails, as it should. So what we're going to have to do here is stretch our minds into the realm of metaphor to navigate this initial pitfall that seems to swallow just about every rational mind from the start. Don't be that person. Yes, we are going to have to speak in metaphor, but we are going to keep our science hats on, okay? So to start, again, dispensing with the literal, It seems to me that based on my profound experiences with plant medicine and just, logic in general, it seems to me that God is not a man with white hair and a white beard wearing a robe sitting on a cloud, literally speaking with his vocal cords, his tongue, and his mouth, speaking existence into being as the story of Genesis goes. Mind you, nowhere in Genesis does it say the word literally, but anyways, God, at least in this context at the time of creation, is not some literal dude literally speaking literal words like I'm doing now. But again, based on my experiences on plant medicine, integration thereafter, and just overall observing existence in general, there seems to be a fractal kind of like as above, so below nature to everything, up to and including our relationship to God. And an example that I typically use for this is ants versus humans. Okay, ants engage in a lot of activities that humans also engage in. Ants, for example, engage in engineering feats, like they build mounds and all the infrastructure underneath them, and they have their own version of warfare, albeit primitive. I mean, they use their mandibles to, bite each other. That's kind of the extent of their warfare. The human version of these things, by contrast, to an ant would be absolutely epically freaking mind-blowing in its levels of complexity and abstractness. And this disparity between ant and human, despite the similar activities, would be nothing compared to the disparity in the complexity and abstractness between human and God. And so, no, I do not think that God literally spoke like I'm speaking now, but I do think, though, that there is some kind of hyper-cosmic, hyper-dimensional equivalent to that, the likes of which is metaphorically similar in form and function to human speech, but again, hyper-cosmically beyond a human being's capacity to even come close to understanding, which is why we need to talk in metaphor. And so, metaphorically speaking, is there any way that we can determine that all of this and all of the universe, is language spoken by God? Can we stick the metaphoric equivalent of a microphone into the void and hear the words spoken by God? Believe it or not, the answer is kind of yes. Okay, so stick with me on this. First of all, it is well known that everything in existence is a vibration, a wave. Subatomic particles and all the fields that they're immersed in are vibrations, as is spoken language. And so thus far, our metaphoric microphone is at least picking up vibrations. But here's the thing. Just because something is a vibration doesn't mean it's language, okay? A fart is a vibration. And there's a big difference, if you haven't noticed this, between the sound of a fart and the sound of someone reciting a sonnet by William Shakespeare, for example. And so to refine our question here, these vibrations that we're picking up here, are they the sound of a fart or are they the sound of William Shakespeare? Well, according to large language model AI, a technology that could very well prove to be the greatest achievement in human history, according to it, everything is language, The way that this groundbreaking technology decodes actual real reality is that it treats it like a language. Pretty interesting. And so our microphone not only seems to be detecting vibration, but structured, intelligent, adaptable, modular vibration, something deliberate, something symbolic. And it's the symbolism of language where we find the origin of this imperfectness in our existence. And that is because of the very nature and mechanics of what a word is. Words are imperfect symbols, imperfect containers for otherwise perfect thought. That is to say, I have a thought in my brain that when I want to communicate that thought to someone else, I then need to take that perfect thought form in my brain and cram it into a container called a word. Right then and there is a loss in translation point of failure where the perfection of that original thought is lost because it was made manifest. And an example of this would be, let's imagine that you have never seen a cat before and you have no idea what they are. The only way for me to perfectly convey to you what a cat is would be when I say the word cat, an actual cat comes out of my mouth for you to interact with. That's the only way. Anything short of that is flawed and imperfect. But alas, I cannot do that. Instead, I use an imperfect thing called a word to convey catness, to you. And before you jump in and say, all you have to do is describe what a cat is, you're missing the point, okay? Any words that I use to describe a cat have their own perfect thought form and their own loss in translation point of failure. And if you don't know what some of the words that I'm using to describe a cat are, then I have to define those words too, and so on and so on. Either way, if you don't already know what a cat is, experiencing an actual cat is infinitely superior than someone describing a cat to you, okay? This cannot be argued, okay? Words are imperfect symbols and are inferior to the actual real things that they truly represent. And so, to me, following this path of logic here, and based on what I was told and shown on my deep experiences with plant medicines, okay, just letting you know that right out the gate here, if existence is essentially a higher-ordered abstract form of language, which I think I made a pretty dang good case for, and if existence couldn't exist without imperfection, which I also believe I made a pretty good case for, it follows that the same loss in translation point of failure flaw that's inherent in human language also applies to God and his spoken word too, just in a, of course, much times infinity more cosmic way. We, us humans, say words that elicit feeling and understanding, right? God, on the other hand, says these hypercosmic equivalent of words that elicit existence itself, okay? He speaks, and a universe, or universes, plural, albeit them imperfect, get vibrated off of his metaphoric cosmic vocal cords. And again, I want to re-emphasize the word metaphoric, okay? I don't truly believe that they're real vocal cords, but if we want to get metaphoric about this, I think that the closest thing that we will come to understanding and knowing what the thing was that vibrated, that created all of existence, the closest thing that we'll come to understanding that through science is something called the amplituhedron. I highly recommend that everyone go look that up and study it, because that, in my educated opinion, is the interface between God and physical existence. But anyway, to get back to the point here and to tie evil back in here, which is the point of this whole episode, I think it goes without saying that evil is not ideal and is therefore not perfect. And so this makes evil by default just part of the imperfectness of the whole system. Existence has to be flawed to exist, and evil is part of that flaw. But if you are only worried and only focused on evil, you're missing out on the beautiful poetry of the flaw and how the paradox of the flaw is responsible for some of the most profoundly, amazingly beautiful things in existence. This loss in translation point of failure thingy that I keep harping about in the spoken word is responsible for all of the paradoxes, which, if I don't know if you've noticed this, is everything. Absolutely everything in physical existence is paradoxical in nature because of this loss in translation point of failure flaw. And for all of you mystics out there, this is the actual source of the yin and yang itself, okay, of karma, of all of that stuff. But, that's mystical stuff. Let's really bring this down to earth. Let's really sink this home with two of the most profound examples that I can think of, okay? Let's take two things that I would consider to be, without a doubt, the most familiar things to us, and that is beauty and love. Believe it or not, and like it or not, we are constantly yearning and searching for both of these things. And the presence or absence of these things in our lives define our lives and who we are. Even in the most rebellious of times, some form of these two deeply resonate with us at all stages in our lives. They are the most familiar things to us, yet they are poetically, without a doubt, the most paradoxical. So let's take beauty, for example. Most people, when asked what beauty is, they'll have a knee-jerk reaction of saying, well, beauty is symmetry. But it is actually a delicate balance of asymmetry within symmetry that gives something unique and distinct beauty. Don't believe me? Just go Google the words perfectly symmetrical face. Eerie stuff, okay? It's kind of, it has that uncanny valley, like mannequin-esque, creepiness to it. But this applies to other forms of beauty too, like let's take music, for example. An unornamented note bowed on a cello does not sound as beautiful as introducing vibrato, which bends the note from flat to sharp repetitively. Okay, it takes a perfect note and wobbles that note to where it's not perfect anymore. And I actually found an example of this, not on cello though, because I couldn't find any great examples on cello, but I found these two ladies that are playing violin, and what they do is they play the same set of notes twice. The first time they play it without vibrato. And what you'll notice is that despite these notes, okay, being perfect, okay, they're not, oscillating between flat and sharp, right? They're staying perfectly on pitch. They don't sound nearly as beautiful as the second time they play the set of notes with vibrato, which again is imperfectly oscillating between flat and sharp. Okay, so here we go. Here's the example. Here is the non-vibrato version. Not very interesting, right? Now here is the vibrato version. I think you can hear something that actually sounds like real music, and that's because real music employs vibrato all the time. That's why music is interesting and sounds beautiful to us. Again, bending a note above and below its perfect pitch. This is imperfection. Doesn't it seem odd that this is what beauty is? Isn't it odd that there are restrictive parameters on such a thing as beauty? And don't get me started on love. If you don't know that love is a paradox, I hate to say it, and I hate to call you out here, but you probably have never been in love, okay? Real love is sacrifice. Real love is vulnerability. Real love is bondage. These are all not the best ideal kind of thing. It seems like the opposite of an ideal. Isn't it odd that suffering is a integral component of love? Isn't it odd that love is like that? Odd indeed. And for those of you more developed here, if your retort is that love needs to be tested, you're a step ahead of the game. Please put a bookmark there. We're going to get there eventually. But here's the thing. If we trace the mechanics of the spoken word back to the source, okay, the perfect thought form before it is crammed into a word, there is no imperfection, okay? All of this oddness, all of the paradox in existence has a flawless source and a higher ordered reality beyond physical existence where all paradox is resolved, okay? All paradox, remember this sentence, okay? Because I'm going to say it so many times going forward in my podcast. All paradox is resolved at the source. And that's because reality there isn't physical. Imperfection is therefore not needed. Perfection doesn't cancel itself out up there in the source. This, of course, means that there are hypercosmic, hyperdimensional, paradox-free, perfect versions of things like love and things like beauty and things like free will and things like life that are the perfect thought form in God's metaphoric brain, the likes of which are inconceivable to us because we only experience the very tip of the iceberg, flawed version of those things down here in physical existence. And so, we now know how evil could spring forth, could emerge from an all-powerful and all-loving God. It seems that it's the only way that physical existence is possible. But the last big question here is not how, but why. Why set up a system like that at all in the first place? If you're all-powerful, you can change the rules of the rules themselves. And so why would you set up the rules of the rules to require something as silly as imperfection? And this is where the real miracle happens, okay? You need to pay attention to this one, okay? I've been arguing, of course, that God is all-powerful, okay? He's infinite, infinitely powerful. And even though I just said the word infinite, you may be surprised to hear that I believe that there are inherent limitations on infinity because of its infinite nature, okay? And it has everything to do with the fact that God, because he is infinite, cannot die. He cannot be killed or even remotely harmed. And that should make total sense, right? If you're infinitely powerful, nothing can harm you. And if nothing can harm you, you cannot be tested and you cannot grow. And so, What if God wanted to expand, in particular, a thing such as love? Okay, everyone always says, God is love, and I would agree to that. But before life was thrust upon the scene, what if God's version of love, although infinite, was stagnant? Okay, what if he wanted, and the key word here is want, because God certainly does not need anything being infinite, What if he wanted to take love and increase it, refine it, strengthen it, by placing restriction and imperfection on it, by challenging it to see what comes out the other side? Such a thing is only possible if you channel yourself through an agent who ideally is oblivious to this channeling and or why it is happening in the first place. And so let's, as an example, take the human enterprise, of the concept of courage, and let's filter love through it, and let's ask ourselves, is love increased, refined, or strengthened through such a thing as courage? The answer to that is absolutely yes. That should be glaringly obvious. And so let's now ask ourselves another question. Before life appeared here in this physical existence and became subject to death and injury, would an infinitely powerful being, God, have any idea what courage is? No. He certainly would not. Like I said earlier, God cannot be killed or harmed. Thus, there is no threat to overcome. If there is no danger, there is no courage. And so, the phenomenon of courage, this human enterprise, was a happy little surprise, a byproduct that spilled out from introducing imperfection into the system to see what comes out the other side. And yes, free will has a big part to play here, but I'm not going to tackle that right now, y'all. That's a whole other episode. But courage, was not the only surprise. The yin to the yang, that is the dark side of existence, though clearly unpleasant to anyone who's living through it, i.e. us. This darkness, this imperfection, this evil, if you want to call it that, produced other byproduct surprises that would have been completely unfamiliar to an infinitely powerful being. Things like perseverance, loyalty, empathy, all of which continues to bolster, buttress, and refine love. And so all of this, to me, seems to be a cosmic reinvestment strategy in which God invests love because he is love, and that love compounds and splits and is returned to him, which he then reinvests back into creation with every person who is born. And sure, it definitely sucks down here, but the alternative of not existing at all really doesn't sound that cool to me. And this is coming from someone who used to be a nihilist for nearly 20 years, It is not cool in any stretch of the word. So even though suffering sucks, it clearly does, at least I know that the rubber band that is my slingshot is just getting pulled back further and further, and that when released, not only will the stone fly further than it otherwise would have, but my experiences and takeaways get folded back into humanity and existence itself, and increases and strengthens and refines love. A love that continues to cycle back and forth to and from our Creator in an absolutely poetic and beautifully profound symbiosis in which we learn from our teacher, but even more miraculously and defying all possible belief, much like a real-life teacher-pupil relationship here on earth. Our teacher, though infinitely powerful, also learns from us. And that would have been a perfect sentence to end this episode on, but I wanted to throw this last little part out there for any of you who are still dug in with this whole materialist or rationalist kind of view where you can't open your minds enough to the possibility of something beyond science, What if all of this fairy tale fantasy stuff that I just threw out there, what if all of this still played out and worked through science? What if God, the creator of all paradox, created within his paradox of creation an ultimate paradox that would forever shield him from proof, thus preserving the importance of gnosis, of finding him through spiritual means? What if he values the journey of discovery through faith over straight knowledge? And what if he transmutes and launders himself through materialism, through science, in order to protect the beauty, the riddle of that faith. When I take plant medicine and I see visions of God, is it really God or is it just molecules? Am I talking to God or am I talking to just my brain? Well, when God tells you that he has no choice but to communicate to you through your own brain, I say, what's the difference? Is it molecules, or is it God, or is it both? Open your mind, challenge the norms, challenge yourself, and find your own answer.